right, just gonna take maybe about 1 more minute. Okay, great. It looks like we are officially live. This is so exciting. So hi everyone and welcome in. It's so great to see you all trickling into our live chat today. We're getting started with about 2 minutes early, so we'll give everybody about 1 to 2 minutes to trickle into our Labside chat, get settled in, get ready for our very exciting upcoming conversation. But while you folks are joining, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the live comments. We love to see who's watching and where you're watching from. It's just always really exciting for us. So go ahead and say hi, and maybe we can even give you a shout out too. But this is very exciting. Hi, everyone. Oh, great. Alrighty, and for those of you just trickling in and joining, like I said earlier, we're just giving everyone about a minute or so to get settled into this Labside Chat live stream. So just welcome in and get prepared to have your socks blown off, because we have a really great chat in store for you all today. Alrighty. Hello. Oh, this is great. Okay. Hi, everyone. I can't keep up with the incoming number. So hi. It's just about 11 o'clock right now. It's so great to see everyone kind of trickling in, getting settled in. We'll get started in just about a minute. We just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to get settled in and watch the whole conversation without missing anything. So we'll give it about 1 more minute. Okay. Excellent. Oh, hello. I know I'm waving to you all, expecting a wave back, but I know I can't see you guys waving back, but it's so great to see you all. All right, so again, if you are just joining us, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the live comments and say where you're watching from. We'd love to see where our audience is tuning in. You know, before in these chats, we had folks from obviously Santa Cruz County, but also up in the Bay Area and Southern California, and some even from different states. So if you would like, go ahead and say hi. We'd love to see where you're from. Alrighty, so it's about 11:01 and let's just go ahead and get started. Like I said, we have a really great program lined up for you all, so I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible. So hello everyone, officially, and welcome to another Labside Chat with the Seymour Marine Discovery Center. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jen Cormier, and I am the Visitor Programs Manager at the Seymour Center. And for those of you who haven't watched a Labside Chat before, this is a really great opportunity to have a short, engaging discussion with a scientist from UC Santa Cruz Institute of Marine Sciences and Long Marine Lab. So we are really, really excited for today. And in this virtual world where most of us are still operating in, the Seymour Center is just so excited to continue to show how scientific research plays a role in the understanding and conservation of the world's oceans. And before we dive into the meaty part of the conversation, I just want to give a really big thank you right up top to those of you who submitted questions in advance for today's chat. You all submitted such wonderful questions. I'm so excited to get to them. And hopefully we'll be able to get to all of them because there were a lot. So stay tuned for that. But if you have any questions during the chat today, please feel free to go ahead and add them to the live comments, and we'll be able to get to those as well. So today's Labside Chat, I am so lucky and fortunate of talking to and asking questions to Dr. Phoebe Lam. who is just really, really awesome. And Dr. Lam is a associate professor in the Ocean Sciences Department at UC Santa Cruz and is doing such awesome research to try to learn more about our oceans and what's happening with them. And we'll be able to dive into all of that during our chat. But Phoebe, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my pleasure.
Oh, I'm so excited to dive in. So, Phoebe, I really enjoy learning about your work and what you do. So, I was all over your website a few weeks ago, and I see that you describe yourself as a marine particle geochemist. So, can you explain exactly what that means?
Yeah, so I'm a chemical oceanographer by training, and I think for most people, they don't know what that means. So what a chemical oceanographer does is he or she takes measures the distribution of chemicals in the ocean and uses that as a fingerprint to basically try to figure out what the major ocean processes are. So when that detective show is on CSI, you know, they're always looking for clues and they're measuring fingerprints and they're measuring this and that, and then they're trying to reconstruct the scene of the crime. So that's how I think a chemical oceanographer works, is that we measure the chemical signatures that are left behind by ocean processes, and then we try to back out what ocean processes led to those signatures. And so when I call myself a marine particle geochemist, what I'm doing is I'm measuring the chemical composition of particles in the ocean. So a particle is, so think of algae, phytoplankton, zooplankton. Those are all, from a chemical oceanographer's point of view, those are all particles. They're just bits of things. I'm not a biologist, so I don't think of them in terms of what organism they are. I think of them as particles that I collect on a filter, and then I analyze their chemical composition and I figure out what they're made of and how they're distributed, and therefore what's going on in the ocean and the biology and the chemistry and the physics that led to that distribution of chemical composition in the particles.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm so glad you defined what a marine particle was, because that was my personal question, is like, what exactly is a marine particle and where do they exist in the ocean? So I'm so glad that you defined that a little bit more. But in your work, where do you find these marine particles that you analyze? Are they like way out in the open ocean? Are they really close to shore? Are they deep? Are they shallow? Like, where are you finding these things?
Yeah, so a particle, we define particles just based on if we put some seawater through a filter, like think of a coffee filter, whatever gets caught in that filter is a particle. And a particle can have a whole bunch of sources. It could be produced within the ocean. So for example, algae, phytoplankton, that is produced in the ocean, it's photosynthesis. And so that would happen in the very top layer of the ocean where you have sunlight. And so you would have the most, and these are organic particles because they're biological. So you'd have the most organic particles in the very top layer of the ocean. But then there's also like external sources of particles. So for example, sediments like sand and silt that get resuspended from the sediments or get carried into the ocean by rivers. So then those would be highest by the coastlines. Sometimes you might be under some like big dust storm or some sort of storm that might drop a lot of sand or dust particles into the ocean. So then that might be higher sort of in the surface. So it depends on what kind of particle we're talking about. The sort of basically the biological ones will be highest in the surface. They'll be highest where you have nutrient availability. That's often also by the coastal regions, but anywhere where you have nutrient availability and sunlight, you'll have a lot of biological particles. And then anywhere you're near like a river or a coastline, you'll have a lot of the sort of inorganic particles.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that's incredible. And so when you said that you are collecting these particles and putting them through the filter, right? Or I guess I should say you're collecting the seawater, running it through a filter, getting the particles. And so how do you collect that seawater? Like, do you just like go out with a cup and scoop it out? Or is there like some special instruments that you use and technology? How do you collect all of that?
This most straightforward way, which is not the way I do it, but I'll start that way, is we have these what are called CTD rosettes. So it's this cylindrical frame that carries these 12-liter cylinder bottles, and they go in open on both ends. So they're like an open cylinder. And then that goes into the ocean. It's on a wire. And then as it comes up, those bottles shut. top and bottom. And so we can trigger them to shut at specific depths. And so that will bring up, say, 10 liters of water at a time at specific depths. And then we can fill a bottle and then run it through a filter. So that's the standard way to do it, but I need a lot more water. And so what I do is I use what's called an in situ pump. And these are about sort of knee high. And really what it is just a big battery pack. So it's run off of batteries and a motor, and a thing to hold filters. And we attach these to a wire. We send them to the bottom, to the ocean. So you can imagine a wire with these different pumps that are hung along the string. And then they just have a timer. And we set the timer to turn on. So we budget, say, half an hour or an hour to actually put the pumps on, send the wire down to the right depths. The timer goes on, it starts pumping, and then it sucks water through the filter. And then we have these filters, the particles are collected on the filters, and then the water that was pumped through goes out the outflow. And then after a few hours, the timer turns off. We know how long we set the timer for. Mm-hmm. So then once it's done, we bring it back up onto the ship. And then now we have water that's already filtered. And the advantage is we filter 1,500 liters. So divided by 4, that's about 400 gallons. So imagine 400 gallons. That's too much water to bring onto the ship. And we do this at, let's say, 8 depths at a time. So 400 gallons times 8, 32, that's too many gallons. So by filtering in situ, what we're doing is we're just running the water through our filters in the ocean at the depth we want it, so that then we can collect enough particles onto our filter. And I'm doing this because the size of our filter is about that. It's like about the size of my head. And we get, I mean, even by running 1,500 liters of water, we're still only getting milligrams of particles. The ocean is a really dilute place. So we really had to filter a lot of water in order to get enough particles for me to do multiple types of analyses on them.
Yeah, totally. Wow. And so you said that you are on a ship, sending down these filters. And so are you out what type of ship are you out? Are you out on a cruise? Are you out on a research vessel? Like, what is that like?
A research vessel. These are, so the United States has a research vessel fleet. And so when we, as scientists, want to go out to sea, we write a proposal to the National Science Foundation or to NOAA, depending, different agencies, to get money, and we request ship time. And the ship time is then allocated based on who gets funded. And there's sort of centrally scheduled ship schedules. And depending on your needs, they could be relatively small, say some tens of feet long, to the biggest ones are several hundred feet long. So the one that I was on recently, and the bigger ones can go out for longer, the smaller ones go out for day trips. So I was on one of these several hundred feet long ships, the Roger Rafael, which is run out of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I was on that for a couple of months, 2 years ago. And so we're out for 2 months. We actually did have a port stop once in the middle of that. So we stopped in Hawaii to reprovision and get more food and more fuel and all that stuff. But we're out there, and what the research vessel is really designed to do research. And so there are, like any ship, there's going to be cranes, there's going to be winches, there's going to be wires, there's going to be, engines, all that. But there's also labs. So on these research vessels, there are labs, and they're very malleable in that every different science group goes onto a ship and can sort of customize it the way that they want. And so we usually have a couple of days at the beginning of every cruise where we set up our equipment in the lab and make it into our own little makeshift out at sea lab. And then we get to do our research, and it's actually a really fun thing. I love it.
Wow, I can't believe it's 2 months. I had no idea you were out at sea that long doing science. That is incredible. It seems like you and your team would get acquainted really fast if you have to spend 2 months together on a ship. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. And so I know I get really bad seasickness. Is that a problem at all for you when you're out on the?
Yes. Okay. really am prone to seasickness,
Yeah.
which you would think would be a problem for my profession. And it was, until I figured out the right drug combination. So,
Okay.
you know, you could take Dramamine and things like that, but Dramamine puts you to sleep. And so I can't work. And so that doesn't work. So there's different types of prescription anti-seasickness medication, and I found the combination that works for me so that I don't feel sick and I also can work.
That's so well, good. I'm glad we got that established. That's excellent. Yeah, because we need you out there to learn these things. So good. And so earlier you said that you study these particles to figure out a fingerprint of the ocean, right? So these different ocean processes that are happening. And so what ocean processes are you mostly looking at? Are you looking at like the carbon pump or something else? Like what are you trying to figure out?
What got me mostly into particles, like why would I study particles? What really got me sucked into this was really carbon. So when I was in college, I learned about the climate and carbon and how CO2 in the atmosphere is, leads to at normal levels a nice comfortable atmosphere for us, but because of rising CO2 we have climate change. And I learned about the really important role that the ocean plays in that. So the ocean is a huge control on how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. And there's a couple of ways that the ocean controls CO2 in the atmosphere, and one is through something called the biological carbon pump. And so what that is you have phytoplankton growing in the surface. They're photosynthetic, so they are taking CO2 from the atmosphere. They're growing and making organic carbon. They're making their own bodies out of it. And then when they die, a lot of it just decomposes and respires back to CO2. But some portion of it, some of these phytoplankton die and then they start to sink. And when they sink, they carry that carbon down from the surface where it ultimately had come from the atmosphere, and they transport it down to the deep ocean where it can be stored for a longer period of time. And particles. So that's where the particles come in, is that once they die and they sink, then oceanographers think them as particles rather than as organisms. And the dynamics of how that sinks, how quickly it sinks, like it doesn't sink the same way in every place. In some ecosystems, you have a phytoplankton bloom and then it just decomposes right away. In other ecosystems, you have a phytoplankton bloom and there's a massive sinking event. And we still don't really understand why some places are more efficient than others. And that's one of the projects I'm working on. Is I'm part of a big program called Exports. It's run by NASA, but also funded by NSF, to try to understand what these controls are: biological controls, physical controls, chemical controls, that lead to why some places are really good at sending carbon to the deep ocean and other places are not. And then from there, with the particles, that got me interested in all sorts of other things about how particles mediate just about the chemistry of everything in the ocean, because things stick to particles. And once the particles sink, then they're bringing everything else down with them too. And so particles are, I'm biased, but particles are pretty central to the cycling of just about everything in the ocean.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So so you've been doing this for quite some time, I believe, right? So when you're out there, have you noticed any sort of changes that have been happening from, like, let's say if you're out there studying now to like maybe 20 years ago? Have you noticed any sort of changes in like maybe the sinking of the carbon or of those dead particles, right? Or have you noticed maybe even just an increase in inorganic particles in your filters? Like what type of changes have you been noticing when you're out there doing your science?
That's a great question. It's a question that's hard to answer because there is a lot of natural variability. And so what by that is just that it's patchy. The world is patchy. Some places I could go to and there's like a huge bloom, and then I could go just a few kilometers away and it will be not very bloomy. And so you can imagine that if I were to go even every year, and sometimes I might hit that patch, sometimes I wouldn't. And so there'd be this sort of noise in the background. So I think that as a personal single observational oceanographer, it would be hard for me in my personal experience to be able to see those changes. But those changes can be seen, but you sort of have to step back and like compile observations from lots of people, from say, satellites that can look over a much broader area, that can have a more continuous source of observation through time. And those types of observations are crucial. And so there's really only a couple of this is what we call time series observations, is where we go back repeatedly and make these observations of a particular environment over and over and over, because only by going repeatedly and sustained over a long time can we start to unravel the actual changes that are happening over time from the natural background noise that's going on. And those are crucial things that take a lot more planning in order to sustain. So as a personal individual scientist, I can't observe those changes, because for me, it's just different every time. But then, it could be seasonal. It could be, where I'm going. I'm not always going to the same place, but there's a huge important role for these time series observations to be made.
Yeah, definitely. That is incredible. And so I just have a few more questions for you. And one of the questions I was really curious about is, how did you get curious about all of these different processes in the ocean and how particles play a role? Like, where did that stem from for you?
Yeah, for me, I think my dad is a scientist, my mother is not. So as a child growing up, my father would often point out things in the environment and sort of explain to me why they were happening. So I definitely had that sort of background growing up. And when I got to college, I couldn't figure out what I wanted to major in. I knew I loved science. I didn't know what kind of science. I loved biology, chemistry, physics, math. I loved it all. And I couldn't decide. And I ended up majoring in environmental engineering because it was one way for me to not have to decide, because it allowed me to study a little bit of everything. And then I realized oceanography was similar in that it allowed me to oceanography is great because it requires you to meld all of these different disciplines in thinking about how the ocean works. Because really the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the geology are so intertwined. You need to understand all of it to understand the ocean. And that ultimately is what fueled my interest in oceanography. Was, well, partly I couldn't decide. And second, it allowed me to continue not deciding and to continue my interest in all of it, to understand something that was so obviously very important for our planet. The ocean is huge. It covers 70% of our surface. It is important for climate. There's so many processes that are super important. And I felt like it was a great way for me to satisfy my internal curiosity about all of these things in an environment that mattered.
Yeah, definitely. Wow, that is really inspiring, because it just sounds like you have your hands on almost every single field in STEM, and you are just solving some of the world's most pressing problems. And I'm so happy that you are at UC Santa Cruz, and I can easily tap into your knowledge level. And so that's really fascinating. So Phoebe, the question that I ask every single scientist is, what is the best part of your job? Like, what makes this all worth
it? There's a bunch of answers to that. So oceanography is fun. Before I came to UCSC, I was at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. So I just spent all my days doing oceanographic research, and I love that. But I also missed the teaching bit. And so that's partly why I came to UCSC. And so the job at UCSC allows me to balance those two things. So I get to sort of share my knowledge with students, and that's really fun. And also the process of teaching allows me to actually learn things that I otherwise might be too lazy to really look into, but you really have to know your stuff when you're teaching. So it forces you to learn things in a pretty deep way, which I enjoy. But the oceanography part of it is I love, because it's so varied. There's some manual labor. There's a lot of thinking. There's talking with people. There's field work. There's the sort of adventure, the exploration of it. It's a job that allows me to do everything. I've gone to every single continent on Earth. I've gone to every ocean basin on Earth. I've been to the North Pole. I've been to Antarctica. I mean, really, what other job would allow me to do that? And I get to do the deep intellectual thinking, where I'm just sort of thinking and sitting at my desk and sort of writing equations, but I also get to like build stuff with my hands and, figure out how to fix like some leak, so it's a job that really taps into lots of different skills and interests, and it's really fun.
Oh, that's so awesome. So do you have any, plans maybe after we are not sheltering in place anymore for your next research opportunity or your next cruise?
Actually, I might be going on a cruise in a month. It's sort of all COVID dependent. I have a colleague at Scripps who had a cruise that got canceled because of COVID and is now being rescheduled in a month. She invited me on because we're collaborating. So we might actually go on a cruise in a month. There's a lot of COVID testing and quarantining in order to make this happen. It might still be canceled. We'll see.
Okay.
But we also just got funded to go back to Antarctica. And so we're planning that. That is to go to the Amundsen Sea in a couple of years, probably. Again, COVID dependent. The schedules are all sort of up in the air. But there's cruises for me in my future.
Well, that is awesome. Phoebe, I could probably talk to you for the next 4 hours about what you do and what you are planning to do. It is just so fascinating. So I just can't say thank you enough for joining us this morning and talking about what you're up to. And it's fascinating. So thank you again. And so since I can't talk to you for 4 hours, do you have a place where folks can go online to learn more about your research or a website or anything like that?
I have a website. I am not very good at maintaining websites. So it's not fantastic, but it'll get you started. Maybe you can place it in the chat.
Definitely.
And there's also been there was a Q&A interview from when I was last at sea and I was helping to co-lead a cruise, and that talks a bit more. There was a whole blog written by one of our science communication graduates from UCSC, and he did a wonderful job, and that actually is a great way to get a sense for the kind of research that we do and what life is like at sea. So and I think Jen will put that also in the chat.
Yes, I will also put that in all of the places where folks can access that information. So that is fantastic. And you know what? If your website's not updated, it's probably because you're busy saving the ocean. So I
there's that.
It's fine. Well, great. That is really wonderful. Thank you so much. And I also want to give a really big thank you to everyone that is tuning in today and watching this Labside Chat. It's really folks like you that make these online programs possible. And so if you are in the position, I ask that you consider making either a donation to the Seymour Center or becoming a member with the Seymour Center. You can find all of that information on our website. And that website is seymourcenter.ucsc.edu. Again, all of those links will be posted below in the video description. And while you're on the Seymour Center's website, go ahead and sign up for our e-newsletter so you can stay up to date about all of the upcoming events and activities that we have lined up. And last but not least, keep in touch with us on social media. We would love to see you on there, and you also get an insider scoop as to what the Seymour Center is up to as well. So again, all of those links are just located right below in the video description. And with that, thank you again so much to everyone watching. Thank you again, Phoebe, for being such a fantastic guest on today's Labside Chat. And, and we hope to see you all next time. So take care, everyone. Bye.